J.D. Vance hits the trail, but now he needs an opponent. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. It has been 1 month since the Trump-Biden debate. Just 1 month. And this week, the culmination of the fallout from Joe Biden's poor performance came when he withdrew from the race and quickly endorsed Kamala Harris. Ohio Democrats rushed to endorse Harris, including Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who up until this week was 100% behind Joe Biden.
We have had the honor to work with her, to serve with her, to travel with her, and we have witnessed her reach down, lift up, and captivate young children. I have seen her strength. I have seen her as America has seen her stand up for law and order and justice, as well as a protector of those whose voices are not heard.
Morgan Harper, in the past, you've been critical of the Democrats sort of playing by the old playbook, the establishment Democrats. Was the quick transition from Biden to Harris within 48 hours, was that the best thing for Democrats right now?
I think it was the best thing. It was certainly a bit of a surprise that they had this Sunday afternoon announcement from President Biden, but I think it was absolutely critical that he followed it up quite efficiently with an endorsement of Vice President Harris. Otherwise, there could have been a lot of uncertainty and room for people to jockey to try to take advantage of this opportunity, potentially become the next president of the United States. And what we saw was quite the opposite, that everyone coalesced around her. And I think the other important point here is, there's often a lot of fixation on how strong can Black women candidates be, and can they win the big races, statewide, national races, just based on the demographics of the country. And Joe Biden put that to bed as well, as she's going to run our record. It's a strong record, and she's the one.
What does this do, Terry, to Ohio? I think Trump is still the overwhelming favorite here, but does this energize Ohio Democrats to at least close the gap?
Well, I think the bigger question is, who does she pick for VP? My guess is on the Arizona senator being the one, but I think there's a question of which strategy do they follow nationally? Do they go after the Midwest Rust Belt of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin to get to the 270 electoral votes, or do they shift to the Sun Belt, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina? Which way do they go in terms of the electoral strategy? Because ultimately, you got to win in the Electoral College, and virtually no scenario is Ohio that important.
Andrew, are Democrats in Ohio holding out hope that maybe they could flip the state blue?
I think it's a little early to really start making those kinds of proclamations. I mean, I did note this week that Bernie Moreno, the Republican Senate candidate, his campaign kind of swapped out Sherrod Brown's too close to Biden with Sherrod Brown's too close to Kamala Harris, and they literally switched the channel, and she disappeared and reappeared. So my takeaway from that is that Republicans kind of view them as the same, and so if they really viewed them as differently, they wouldn't be doing that.
There's a lot of copying or cutting and pasting in basically speeches and campaign ads, Joe, over the past week. Biden for Harris. Sherrod Brown really was trying to distance himself from Joe Biden. Does he distance himself, or does he embrace Kamala Harris, do you think?
I think Sherrod Brown's going to continue to talk about the things Sherrod Brown's been talking about, which is not the top of the ticket. He's been talking about his record with workers, with unions, with issues that he's worked on in the Senate, and I think that's what we'll continue to see out of him.
I think the biggest question is the campaign, and remember, we've got 3 whole months plus to go, lots of time. But is this going to be a battle of personalities? Because both Trump and Harris have a lot of personalities, a lot of things to get people excited one way or the other. Or is it more about policies? And we get back to the question I always look at in the polling, where is the people's view of the direction of the country? And right now, about 75% think the country's on a wrong direction. So do they want to keep more of the same? Do they think things have changed? Where are they at on policy versus personality?
Because some of those folks are Democrats who don't like the prospect of seeing Donald Trump in office. No, they don't like that direction.
But again, people have strong opinions. But again, is it policy or is it personality?
I want to get to the excitement again, Morgan. In a recent Marist poll showed that 57% of black voters were ready to vote for Joe Biden. That's way down from the 83% he got in 2020 and way, way down from what Barack Obama got, which was 96%. What impact will Kamala Harris have on the black vote in Ohio, do you think?
I think she could potentially have a big impact. I agree with what other panelists have said, that it's unlikely Ohio's in play for the Electoral College math that needs to come together for Vice President Harris to win, though it's still early, but it seems unlikely. But either way, what we've seen is unprecedented levels of enthusiasm. People are excited to be a Democrat. They're proud of the party and Joe Biden for making this decision. Small dollar donors are up for her, people that are signing up to volunteer. Some of that will trickle down to some of the key races that we have here in Ohio this cycle, regardless of what happens on the presidential end of the ticket.
Andrew, this is a honeymoon of sorts. She's the new face, the new thing, a lot of positive press right off the bat. How long does it last? Because she's still, now she has to run on her record after the excitement wears off, the convention's coming up, the negative ads will start. How long does the excitement last?
I guess we'll see, but there's usually also a halo effect from the convention itself, which isn't for a couple of weeks. So I guess, you know, it's maybe like a stroke of good timing if this is going to happen, that it happened right before there's a virtual convention scheduled and there's the actual convention itself. So that might kind of prolong things. But that's a really good question. I think that with Democrats, a week ago, they wouldn't have said, yeah, we're really discouraged by the state of this race. I mean, that was kind of taboo to say out loud. But I think kind of the converse excitement that you see and the acknowledgement of some of those concerns kind of in retrospect, now that there's been a change, kind of speaks for itself.
Joe, Democrats must be relieved that this is happening, even though it is late. There's only 100 days left. I mean, Sherrod Brown came out last week and said he thought Joe Biden should step aside, even though Joyce Beatty said she was 100% with Joe Biden. You know, she's also now 100% with Kamala Harris.
Well, I think they're hoping that this translates into people coming out to the polls who wouldn't have ordinarily voted. I think that's the area, you know, when I talk to politicians, poli-sci folks, they tell me that the thing that they're looking at is who's going to energize those voters who have been sitting on the sidelines since Barack Obama ran for office. And the one thing I've noticed is this morning there was an ad that was released by Kamala Harris, and it sounded like the Yes We Can ad, the famous Yes We Can ad from Barack Obama, and it was freedom with Beyonce, I guess that's her name, and you know, it was like very reminiscent of that ad. So I don't know if there's like a deliberate attempt, but it sure sounded Obama-esque to me.
Yeah, Terry.
Well, I want to back up a little bit what Joe said. Turnout is a big thing to measure, and like yesterday, the New York Times came out with a new poll, and I like to look at the internals and see, and there's some big differences in gender, in age groups. There's some other key categories, but the Democrats, one of the reasons why they had to dump Biden was because he was lagging and not energizing younger and minority and city voters, and they obviously had to fire it up, and I think Harris could potentially do that. The question is, again, what issues or what's driving people as they're starting to think about it? Because right now we're still, the Olympics, it's summer, a lot of normal people, unlike us at the table, they aren't going to focus until September when they know it's all settled out.
Although I think the past month has people paying a little bit of attention anyway. Of course, the elevation of Kamala Harris to the top of the ticket means J.D. Vance needs a new opponent. Ohio's junior senator's first stop on the vice presidential campaign trail was in his hometown of Middletown. He hit all of the themes of the Trump campaign.
Here's the very simple thing. We believe that we want to make more of our own stuff, and we believe that we want to have secure elections, and we believe we want to have schools that don't indoctrinate our children. That's not racist, ladies and gentlemen. It is common American Middletown sense, and I'm proud to be from this town and to take the wisdom from it.
It was a fiery speech filled with plenty of praise for Donald Trump and plenty of criticism for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But it was an Ohio state senator who stole the show.
I believe wholeheartedly Donald Trump and Butler County's J.D. Vance are the last chance to save our country politically. I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. It's the greatest experiment in the history of mankind. And if we come down to a civil war, I'm glad we got people like Schmitty and the Bikers for Trump on our side.
Lang quickly and fully apologized, saying he got caught up in the moment. He says his remarks did not accurately reflect his views. But Terry, in politics, they say a gaffe is the truth by accident. There was a lot of nods and applause after he said that. What do you make of what happened there?
Well, you can take the word civil war and mean people are going to argue about things. You can mean something else. But the reality from people at the State House tell me Lang is not the kind of person that's way out there on the extremes. But the real reality is it's nice to talk about Vance. He's running for vice president. But in this election, it's going to be about the two big stars that people either love or hate at the top. I'm not sure the vice president or what some state senator from Ohio says is going to be that much the deciding factor.
But it did distract from Vance's message that day. He went a little off script, made a joke that kind of fell flat. How do you think he did in his first week?
Well, again, he's vice president candidate. The media will occasionally cover that. The opponents will attack him. But in the final analysis, it's going to be Trump versus Harris. That's the key thing. Where are they at on the issues? What's the differences? And we get back to the 6 or 7 key swing states. Where are the independents at? Do the people turn out in those states? That's where it's going to be.
Morgan, J.D. Vance they basically say he's going to park himself in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin during this campaign to try to win these states. Now, he went out west this week. He went to Reno and Arizona, I guess. Reno, Nevada, and Arizona this week. But
yeah, and I'm sure he'll be checking in with his Silicon Valley friends for lots of money along the way. I mean, it's very clear to me that J.D. Vance is not ready for prime time. He only won the Senate seat because he got the endorsement of Donald Trump. And then he was able to hole away in the Senate and be a statesman and focus on policy. Well, now he's back on the campaign trail. And we're seeing how he's going to be affiliated with all of the Republicans, some of whom are extremely out there and saying things like, and I don't know, I kind of disagree with Terry a little bit here. We all know what a civil war is. We all know what it means. And that's why we don't use that term very often in general conversation. And I think that there's going to be major liability coming from J.D. Vance. And the only other thing I would add is getting back to engaging with pop culture. I mean, Gen Z is really tapping into just how scary J.D. Vance is with his statements about the childless cat ladies and that kind of risk.
we'll get to that in a minute. But Joe, any State House reaction to J.D. Vance's first week on the campaign and Senator Lang's comments there?
Well, let's be real that the politicians are not at the State House this week, so we're not hearing from them personally. But you saw, the politicians were walking away from that. The other Republicans were not really, going there. They were on other talking points. And we did see, some of the Democrats talking about how that was a out-of-place comment. It should never have been said. But I think what we've seen more is the inconsistencies of J.D. Vance's record. And that's what Democrats have been hammering home this week.
Now, Andrew, we've all been through this here in Ohio. He ran for Senate, and we all talked about how he hated Donald Trump or disliked him early on, then came around, and he said he was wrong. And we sort of vetted some of this stuff out. But now as the national spotlight is on him, it's kind of a different ballgame.
Yeah, the kind of same issue that he dealt with in the 2022 campaign here in Ohio is basically being relitigated at a national stage. But we're kind of seeing the two things. One is unsurfacing these old comments that he made about the childless cat ladies, and he floated letting parents have more votes for each one of their kids. He said some things that were kind of weird at the time, but either didn't get that much broad notice or were sort of made a little bit more sense if you're at a think tank conference or something on the right, and now he's a major vice presidential candidate, plays a little differently. But then, the other question is how much of an issue are they going to make out of this Trump thing? Do they want to call attention to that? I mean, I'll be interested to see where they go, but ultimately you could easily see a cut of, take it from Trump's vice president. All these things that he said on tape, they have a rich buffet of things to choose from.
But he's not alone in having changed his opinion of Donald Trump. But this, for lack of a better term, the single cat lady controversy, he said in 21, let's give votes to all children in the country, but let's give control over those votes to the parents of those children. Terry, that seems unconstitutional.
I don't think it's going anywhere quick, but
he said it a couple times.
But you're right. Yeah. There's lots of videotape out there of lots of people saying things, including as late as July 8th, when Biden said we need to put a bullseye on Trump. And obviously that didn't play well, but it didn't get much attention from the media other than Lester Holt asked him about it, and he tried to waffle off. So there's lots of things, politicians on both sides in the video file. The question is what's relevant for today and what's relevant for tomorrow.
Well, it did, after the Trump attempted assassination, it certainly, we lowered the volume for what? 36, 48 hours. I mean, they were knocked back to civil war and existential threats to democracy.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of focus on how Trump's rhetoric can be quite vitriolic, but J.D. Vance says a lot of things that really stoke the flames of political unrest, and so it'll be interesting to see how they manage that. I think another dynamic that we have to watch here is in the Senate so far, J.D. Vance has tried to establish himself as an economic populist and really pushing in a direction that was much more prevalent in Donald Trump's first campaign in 2016 about some of these policies of being strong on China and bringing back manufacturing to the U.S. Biden has adopted a lot of that agenda. And so the more that J.D. Vance is focused on the policy, I do think it also pushes Kamala Harris to continue to hit those issues home as well.
And some of that economic populism is what Sherrod Brown talks about too. So there's interesting intertwining into the issues.
Do you think had Biden dropped out 2 weeks earlier that J.D. Vance, Terry, would have been the nominee for vice president? Because the Hill reports that a lot of more establishment Republicans, foreign policy hawks, don't like J.D. Vance as their candidate. They don't think he brings anything new to the ticket. He's basically the same as Trump.
Well, there's always people within parties who want their friends or their associates to be the one rather than somebody else. So I think time's going to ultimately tell. But again, in early September, we're going to have a better sense after all the convention booms, if there were booms, all the other things settle out and people start focusing. That's when you're going to look at the internals and the polls and seeing where do the campaigns put their money in a time. Because again, do they go the Sun Belt? Do they go the Midwest Rust Belt? That's going to be the key strategic call.
All right. Ohioans will get to vote on a plan to change how the state draws its state legislative and congressional maps. With petition signature verification complete, the group named Citizens Not Politicians easily had the number of signatures it needed to get on November's ballot. If voters approve, the process will move from elected state leaders to an independent commission divided between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Lobbyists, political consultants, and elected officials need not apply to sit on that commission if voters approve. Joe Ingles, they made the signature limits, the minimum requirements pretty easily. What does that say about this campaign?
Well, you know, they're banking on the popular message, basically. People don't like politicians for the most part. I mean, they rank pretty low. And Citizens Not Politicians kind of says what they're trying to do. So, you know, I think that's going to be something that works in their favor. I also think that there's a possibility there's going to be a very strong pushback from Republicans who have power at the State House. They don't want to give it up. And they're going to come out with something, I think, that will muddy the water and confuse voters. So this is one of those times that voters really need to get engaged and read and figure out what they're voting on because, you know, there's going to be a lot out there and, you know, you're just going to have to do it for yourself. Heavy lift.
Morgan, Ohio has voted on redistricting 5 times since 1981 and 4 times in the past 20 years. Is this the time that we've settled this fight?
Hopefully, and I do agree with Joe. I mean, I think a lot of regular people who aren't the hardcore politicos are aware of this effort and also that it might be the final attempt at our actually preserving democracy in Ohio. So we are going to see a lot of enthusiasm. We've had the experience of the abortion ballot initiative that kind of trained people about what these things are and why they matter and why you have to vote for them. And ultimately, barring some shenanigans from the Republican Party, hopefully it'll be successful.
Well, let's get to the possible shenanigans. Andrew, you wrote about this week. The Republicans may try to put another amendment on the ballot, but time is short. They don't talk to each other. How plausible is this?
Yeah, it's hard to, that's a good question. It doesn't, the people that I talk to about this idea don't think it's very likely to work. There's a deadline that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Legislators aren't really scheduled to vote. It's not clear if they were to vote, if there's enough support in the House. It's not clear they could get enough people. Like, they have to have a certain percentage of the legislature, so they have to get those people in the seats to actually cast the vote, and a lot of people are on vacation. So it's an open question, but it's interesting at least that this is something that's being looked at. It sheds some light on the state of mind of state Republicans, including Governor Mike DeWine, about how they view this issue.
So if there are 2 questions on the ballot, Terry, the one that gets the most votes wins. Does this show that Republicans are nervous that this is going to pass?
Well, let me put a fork in this when it's done because, as Andrew noted, you can't get people back. They don't have it written. the timetable's too short, so that's not going to happen. But the key thing on this gerrymandering issue is the question, follow the money and look at the message, because where does the money come from that both sides are spending? Who's on TV first and who defines the issue? Because right now people know kind of about gerrymandering, but if you look at the history of past issues, a lot of them have went down in flames once people discovered the details on how they work or how they don't work. So we got a long ways to go, but money and message are two key things.
It can be confusing, but I think the voters do understand it a little better than they did, certainly in 1981 anyway. All right, our final topic, the Ohio Police Union is out with its endorsements for 2024. The union has endorsed Senator Sherrod Brown in the past, but decided not to endorse him or his opponent this year. Apparently, some members remain upset over a tweet Brown sent after a Columbus police officer shot a 16-year-old black girl armed with a knife. The police union also refused to endorse Supreme Court Justice Joe Deters. It went with his opponent, Melody Stewart. The union remains upset about how Deters prosecuted a University of Cincinnati police officer who shot an unarmed black man in 2015. It all raises the question of how valuable these endorsements are. Andrew Tobias, as a good Irishman, I can hold a grudge, but it looks like these police unions are holding a grudge too. A couple of for some candidates they might endorse.
Yeah, so the question is, do these matter? And I don't know that the members of unions these days are really that swayed by the people who their leaders endorse. But I do think for a Democrat like Sherrod Brown, who's going to be accused of being anti-police, there's this sort of broader discussion about law and order and that kind of thing. I think having a police union endorsement could be helpful. I will say, though, too, that Brown's campaign had a really effective ad that came out this week that showed a Republican Wood County sheriff saying that nobody's tougher on fentanyl than Sherrod Brown. I'm a lifelong Republican, but I'm saying that. I mean, I think that's a really powerful message for somebody like him. So I think it's significant that he didn't get the endorsement. But like I said, I think that campaign I referred to kind of ameliorates it a little bit.
So Terry, you know, we know union membership has declined, union strength has declined. How valuable are union endorsements now for any candidate compared to how they were in the years past?
They don't mean quite as much, but it really depends at what level you're running, because I think for a Sherrod Brown, if he'd had the FOP, that could have helped buttress some things. Supreme Court's down the line, and I'm sure there'll be some other factors at play. But whether, again, it's union or business or FOP, it's of importance, but it's not quite what it used to be.
Morgan, you've run for office in the past. How much did you seek union support? Did it matter in your campaigns? How much of a factor is it for folks who are running for office?
Well, I would have welcomed all worker union support and just keep that in mind for the future.
Sure.
But no, in all seriousness, I mean, I think it matters on who's endorsing, does it come with financial resources, and then what are the political dynamics? To me, I don't know that Sherrod Brown, I mean, I think it would help with a certain segment of the population, but he also is just his own political brand. He's been around forever. He's running his race. But with Melody Stewart, I mean, it is interesting that she's going to be running now, identified as a Democrat, but be able to point to that endorsement as she's trying to convince a wide swath of the population to get behind her. I think it could be meaningful there.
But as her as a candidate for Supreme Court, one of the dynamics she's got to think about, how much do you play up the police endorsement? Because some of her base, including the African-American community, they don't look highly upon people that are police endorsed. So she's got some cross currents she's got to weigh and consider.
Joe, unions still play a role in it, especially on the Democratic side, in picking statewide candidates. They have a pretty loud voice.
Yeah, and they have deep pockets. I mean, that's the thing. Unions can make a big difference in a candidate, and when they get behind you and they have the numbers, they're members, they have the money, it can make the difference between whether you win or lose.
How much now do union members follow their union leadership? Is there more of a divergent than there was, say, 20, 30 years ago?
I think so, and we're seeing some of those dynamics play out, bringing it back to the presidential race. The fact that we had the Teamsters president speak at the Republican National Convention, that was a big shift, and he said in his remarks that he's trying to engage all parties here. So especially in a lot of these large national worker unions, I think we are seeing that the membership is mixed, and the leadership, depending on the union, is maybe trying to reflect that in how they're engaging politically.
And on the union, it depends, because the teachers union, it's not unusual for them to write out $1 million check as they did in the last governor's race. But some of the other unions, including the FOP, don't have as thick a checkbooks and can't write as much money. So there's so many different variables.
Let's get to our final off the record parting shots. And Morgan Harper, you're up first.
So we might not know what the cost of things is anymore. I don't know if people have noticed this, but the prices with dynamic pricing, the ability to change prices through algorithm, the FTC is looking into this, and I think this is very interesting because if you don't know how much something costs, it's impossible to budget, and we need to figure out if we actually even know what the prices are
Or
at all.
comparative shop even. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Get your TV remote, put fresh batteries in because you want to be practicing during the Olympics doing mute, switching channels, because the good news in Ohio, we won't have many presidential ads, but the sewer system in the Senate race, in the gerrymandering battles, the TV channels are going to be flooded with ads and they're not going to be positive puff pieces.
And Andrew.
I'm excited that LeBron James is representing Ohio, carrying the flag in the opening ceremony, or during the opening ceremonies today. And the fun thing is that he's only the second Ohioan to ever do it. The last one was figure skater Scott Hamilton in 1980. So it's a pretty rarefied air that he's in.
Interesting. And Joe Ingles.
I'm going to be watching to see what happens with debates because it seems like we've lost debates where the moderators are able to fact check and able to actually have a real debate. So I'm wondering if we're going to have real debates, or is it going to be one of these fluffy little forum things?
Well, if you need a drink after the past month, we have the perfect event for you. WOSU's Politics at a Pint returns in a few weeks. We will host another edition of our popular event that combines politics and craft beer. Please join me and WOSU's Anna Staver Thursday, August 15th at 7th Sun Brewing on North 4th Street. We and a panel of experts will discuss the incredible 2024 campaign. Go to wosu.org/events to register. That's Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out on Facebook. Also watch us anytime at our website, wosu.org, the PBS video app, and YouTube. For our crew and panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.